are here to talk about a pretty interesting horror movie come supervillain origin story in The UNHEALER. This one is directed by Martin Guigui and stars Natasha Henstridge, who you may know from Species fame, and genre legend Lance Henriksen. Now, this is a pretty interesting movie because it's got both lots of kind of tried and tested kind of cliches, but also some original stuff along with those cliches. So it's quite an interesting mix of familiar stuff that you've kind of seen before. A bullied teen getting revenge on his bullies, the kind of the sympathetic girl that kind of gives him a helping hand, but also an original some stuff as well. What is this film you speak of, you might be saying. Okay, so The UNHEALER. So we get a kind of a sequence at the beginning where we see Lance Henriksen's character, who is some type of faith healer, but we get the impression that he's got some legitimate powers, but from some type of unscrupulous means. Something to do with some type of ancient Native American burial rites, or something along the lines of that. Inevitably, he crosses paths with Natasha Henstridge, whose young son, his teenage son, suffers from a severe eating disorder where he's kind of eating kind of rubbish and plastic and things like this, and he's getting bullied at school because of it, and he's ultimately becoming very ill through malnutrition. He can't stop eating polystyrene and kind of like clothes and things like this. Anyway, so Lance Henriksen, really only in it for a kind of a buck to try and kind of make some money, ends up kind of coming in contact with this young man and ultimately imbuing him powers that not only kind of heal him and get him to full health, but also gives him some type of kind of superpowers where it seems he can do a number of things, including if he gets hit or hurt, that kind of pain is reflected back at whatever kind of caused it. So if someone were to punch him in the face, the pain of that and the actual damage would then be inflicted on whoever threw the punch. And he also seems to be able to inflict pain on people by ingesting something that belongs to them. Inevitably, it's what will he do with these powers? Ultimately he becomes involved in this kind of gang of bullies that sort of obviously test his resolve, shall we say. What will happen? You'll have to watch the movie to find out. So, what did I like about this story? Like I said, I think this is a good mix of a somewhat typical formula. Like I've said, we have a bullied teen from a kind of a poor white trash background, working class, all of this, who's picked upon by the kind of the popular kids at school. His only solace is this one pretty girl that kind of has pity for him and things like this, and inevitably gets revenge on on these kind of the bullies and those who have tormented him. So that's all kind of stuff we've seen plenty of times before. But the original stuff here is the kind of the method of how he does it, where he's, it raises some interesting questions, like he physically actually doesn't hurt anyone himself, but he can cause pain by, for example, inciting violence to him, ultimately knowing it's going to hurt someone else. So does that make him, the aggressor? It's some interesting moral questions, although the movie doesn't really go too much into that, admittedly. But nonetheless, it's certainly some type of an interesting hook to this movie. And obviously, as the film goes on, this young lad is getting kind of more confident and more adventurous. And it's where will he go? I mean, this could be, although it has horror elements, I suppose, because we do see some kind of gore scenes in it. It ultimately is a little bit like a slasher in some ways. But it's kind of like he could be potentially a kind of superhero, but he could be a kind of supervillain himself. So I actually think the story elements here have both elements of kind of a tried and tested formula that we know kind of is popular, but with some original elements. I think it's great. I think there's a kind of a really kind of a fun idea to have sprinklings of originality in a kind of somewhat kind of otherwise formulaic movie. Well, I've got to say the actor who plays our main character, this young put upon boy, does a good job of kind of making you feel sympathy for him, but also a little bit kind of wary of where he's going to go, because I genuinely didn't know I kind of guess because it's kind of a horror film where it would end up going, but you know, you don't really know where he's going to go. Is he going to try and be altruistic, or is he going to kind of ultimately be a bit more selfish and kind of, you know, go for his kind of things to kind of more short-sightedness, shall we say. It a little bit reminded me of Brightburn in kind of some aspects, because it kind of plays, as I say, like a superhero origin or a supervillain origin more kind of lightly. I actually quite liked some of the supporting characters. There's this. I really liked Natasha Henstridge in this role as his kind of his mother. I thought she did a good job. I mean, she doesn't have a ton of screen time, but it's a definite supporting role rather than just a cameo. Lance Henriksen is really bizarre in this movie. As this kind of like weird sort of faith healer at the beginning, although he really is more or less a cameo. And I quite like some of the other the characters as well. This kind of girl who takes pity of him. I thought does a genuine job of, you know, making it seem like it's not that kind of that typical cliche popular girl who seems to have a heart, and you do feel that they do have some pre-existing relationship, and you can buy it, and that's down to the actress and I guess the writing as well. And I also like the kind of like the this cop who's kind of trying to help him as well. This kind of Native American cop who maybe gets an idea that something might be kind of going on here. So that was all pretty good. There are some quite inventive kind of deaths and kind of like murder scenes, I suppose. And like I've said, it's done in such an original way where, you know, you are inflicting damage on one person, but the actual, you know, the actual life-threatening situation will happen to kind of someone else. And it kind of, I don't think the movie is particularly kind of obvious where it's going to kind of go, because you're not quite sure what's going to happen, even though it's, as I say, it does have the same tropes as a kind of many of these kind of teen revenge movies. I still wasn't quite sure where it was going to go towards the end of the movie, which I thought was kind of quite good. It's a low budget film, and the effects are a little bit ropey, but they don't kind of go OTT on it. And I think it, you know, for the kind of the budget of the movie, I think it was fine. I thought the music was pretty good here, although it really kind of accentuated the kind of the scenes and kind of made it kind of quite a thrilling movie. What didn't work for me, there are a couple of things I would say with this film. The powers themselves are a little vague. So when we kind of first introduce the Lance Henrik's character, we'll kind of get a exchange between him and this Native American guy, and it's like these powers seem really vague. It's kind of like what the script needs it to do, and I thought it was a little bit convenient that our main character discovers he can kind of plus his powers by eating personal belongings of people who he wants to harm. I thought, well, that's handy that he happens to be eating all this kind of like non-organic stuff to begin with. That's kind of real handy, that one. So that was a little bit convenient. Our Native American kind of shaman type guy just seems to wander around and kind of vaguely offer some Yoda-like advice, which doesn't seem to be particularly kind of practical. And he seems, considering he knows what's going on, he doesn't seem to be particularly motivated to stop it. He just kind of, you know, turns up here and there and offers some kind of like, you should come to me, you know, and all this kind of stuff. But, you know, knowing what's kind of is going on, he doesn't seem to be particularly forward-thinking with it. The ending, I've got to say, is a little bit of a kind of a mixed bag. I don't quite think it was, the climax was as good as it could have been. And there are, again, a couple of sequences here where it just kind of like, that seems a little bit kind of like silly at times. We have a scene where someone is drowning, and I won't give you say why this happens, but someone is drowning, and then this person's friends just seem to be standing around watching this happen until the plot determines it's too late for them to kind of go in and help, and thinking, well, surely they would go in. You know, again, it's just like the plot needs this to happen, so it will kind of like, it will happen in a kind of like somewhat of an unrealistic kind of way. But despite, I would say, some really reasonably minor flaws, I did enjoy this movie, and I got to say, I had fun watching it, and I enjoyed the kind of the synthesis of having an original kind of concept in the way this kind of power manifests and how it's used, bolted onto a somewhat kind of familiar teen revenge story. And like I said, you can kind of, it feels comfortable and familiar, but you still feel you're seeing new stuff as well. So I'm actually going to give this one a 7 out of 10. I did enjoy this one, and despite a couple of flaws, it was a good watch. Have you seen it? What did you think of it? Leave me a comment and I'll look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.